Like and follow if you love horror. Before Patty knew it, Warren's head popped off. Warren's head did not roll as expected. It flopped side to side like one of those wobbling children's toys, making a god-awful squishing noise of meat and blood as it went. Jesus Christ! Almost in shock, George tried to maintain control of Carlos. Bronson threw up and let go, while Patty jumped off Warren's body and backed up to the wall. Carlos threw George to the ground and ran out the door. George hadn't fully recovered when he looked up and saw a cluster of glossy orbs staring in through the window. Just as quickly as they appeared, they vanished. His whole world started to shrink. He staggered to get back on his good leg. Between the gruesome presentation of his friend's head and what he'd just witnessed outside, it was a struggle to stay conscious. While George was distracted with what he saw through the window, Bronson and Patty watched as Warren's head came to life. What looked like a tail with a stinger uncoiled from the neck as several squirming appendages pushed through the face, as well as out the eyes, the mouth, and the nose. They limply lifted the head and turned to face Bronson and Patty. Bronson vomited again, while Patty was frozen in place. They heard the slight crunching sound coming from the forehead. The forehead caved inward, and a cluster of shiny black orbs forced their way to the surface. Regaining his composure, George bolted for the gun cabinet and began pulling out rifles and shotguns. He tossed a Mossberg to Patty and pulled up a rifle for himself and Bronson. "The fuck is that thing?" Patty said before checking the chamber and making sure shells were readied. The three friends stood there trying to muster a reaction. Outside, something started playing on their nerves. A scratch came at the window, then another at the patio door, then even the skylight on the roof. Shuffling was heard along every wall and on the roof. Bronson looked around, as did George, the two spinning wildly. Patty never took her eyes off of Warren's head. It just looked back at her. The glossy cluster of black orbs atop Warren's brow must have been eyes, even though they looked like roe. "Fuck it," Patty snapped out of it, took an unsteady aim, and blew... Let me try that one more time. "Fuck it." Patty snapped out of it, took an unsteady aim, and blew the fucking thing into trunky ribbons that streaked across the floor. Bronson tried to get his head back in the game. "Everyone back to back." They obliged as he took the rifle from George. "What do you think these things are?" Patty said, looking over the walls, windows, and ceiling, her nerves on edge. "Well, whatever they are, they clearly don't like bullets." George gestured to what was left of Warren's head. A large, dark mass burst through the patio doors with a loud crash. Everyone turned and opened fire aimlessly, unsure what they were even shooting at. Before anyone could turn around, the window in the kitchenette shattered inward, and another black mass burst through. Then another came through the skylight, and another on the opposing wall of the kitchenette. The group opened fire, desperately pushing against each other's back, hoping each was alive and providing support. "Need rounds," Bronson cried out. George passed him a magazine behind him, only taking his hand away from the trigger long enough to do so. "I'm out," Patty shouted. She took a knee and started to fumble more shells into her shotgun. "The fuck are these things?" Bronson screamed over the gunfire, hardly intelligible to the other two. As the question was rhetorical, no one answered. No one could make anything out in the flashes of gunfire. "We gotta find safety," Patty demanded, hoping someone had a plan. "Loft!" George called out. "Grab more ammunition from the cabinet." Patty swept by the other two and dove into the cabinet for boxes of rounds. She hurriedly scooped up as many as her arms would hold, trying her best to keep the shotgun tucked under her pit. There was no window next to the stairs, though it was close to the skylight, and every odd second George nervously aimed at it. They slowly backed up the stairs, Patty keeping an eye on the loft in case something got up there. She wouldn't be able to shoot, but she could at least warn the boys. "Tell me you left your phone on the damn... Oh, wait, that's Bronson. "Tell me you left your phone on the damn bed." Oh, no, that's Patty. Well, "Tell me you left your phone on the damn bed," Patty barked at Bronson. "I don't know," Bronson yelled back, panicked. Watch the loft. I'll watch the windows, Patty barked again. Let's hope these things can't eat through the walls. Upstairs, George and Bronson had a perfect vantage point over most of the cabin, save the kitchenette. Patty quickly dropped boxes of rounds for them, still eyeballing the loft's window. She then took a knee and started loading her shotgun. Where the hell is it? A shadow rushed across the window. She knew she didn't have long. Chambering a shell, she scrambled for her husband's phone, hoping it would still be there. Finding it, she dialed 911. Not the sheriff, George called between the shots. Fine, the state boys then. Hell, the goddamn military. Patty didn't argue. She had no idea what George might know and didn't really care. Patty placed the phone on speaker and threw it on the nightstand, still focusing on the window of the loft. Even if she couldn't communicate with the emergency operator, the sounds of gunfire should do enough talking. Something forced its way through the loft window. It didn't even make it fully through before it was sent back by the force of buckshot. A muffled, staticky voice came over the phone. Patty couldn't make out what it said and didn't give a rat's ass when she responded. Help! Lot 8! Kodiak Mountain Preserve! She didn't care to explain. She just kept repeating the message before she plunged a couple more rounds through the window of the loft. Within moments, the dark masses creeping out throughout the cabin were no longer visible, and the shooting ceased. The tense silence was only broken by the ringing in everyone's ear. It was nearly an hour before George and Bronson lowered their guns. Nearly an hour before Patty... Nearly another hour before Patty begrudgingly agreed to lower hers. The three huddled together in the corner of the loft, aiming at the slightest flicker of light from the stove. All they could do was sit and wait and hope the next thing to walk through the cabin doors was the state cops. Why not the sheriff? Patty said, wide-eyed, trying to break the insufferable silence. Long story short, he could be in on it, George replied, unsure how to tell them what he knew. Was Carlos in on it originally and trying to convince George not to go for help? Had he been trying to tell George what was going on, only for it to affect him after? Neither made sense without more information. What was it, anyways? It was hard to know who to trust, but that might have been Carlos's intention all along. Waiting seemed to take all night, but with their nerves on edge, a second seemed like an hour. Minute after agonizing minute, they waited unsure of what to do. The space between their breaths started to increase. Every breath broke with a longer wait for the next as time dragged on. Then they heard a distant thumping of helicopter blades and the buzzsaw snowmobile engines. Soon, a spotlight swept across the cabin and the blue strobes of emergency lights flickered against the firelight. The tense breath of the three turned into exhausted sighs of relief. Hot damn, here they come! George squeezed Bronson's hands. He squeezed back as tightly as he could, which was nearly crushing. Patty broke as tears began to stream down her face. She belted out a yee-haw. At that moment, a pack of state cops burst in. They filled out the cabin and announced themselves with the typical authoritarian commands. The group declared their position and threw down their arms. It was difficult to explain the situation to the cops, but by agreeing to a search and remaining calm, they convinced the troops to take them to the hospital as opposed to jail. Given the circumstances, the state boys were apt to treat them more like criminals than victims. Everything was riddled with bullet holes. There was a headless dead man, and from a quick, untrained examination, it could seem as though his head was blown off by a shotgun. But there were a few things that corroborated their story. The windows and doors had been clearly blown inwards, and someone had taken an axe to the generator. After that, convincing the skeptical officers this was a home invasion gained traction. So the group was loaded up into the chopper and airlifted to the closest hospital. The town that dreaded sundown. I think that's chapter 5. Everyone had their faculties robbed from them as they were poked and prodded by nurses. Regardless of their mental state, the cops kept pressing for more answers. For the three, everything was a blur. The cops weren't even forgiving when Patty, George, and Bronson were required to identify the remains of Warren's body. They wanted to know what happened to the head.